Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in this morning. My name is Michelle Klopper, and I'm so thankful that you have joined this group, The Joyful Homeschool. I'm really excited this morning to bring to you an interview with a wonderful homeschooling lady. Her name is Bonnie Landry, and she has 7 children, and she has been homeschooling going into her 28th year. Attended 2 or 3 of Bonnie's workshops that she has presented in Nanaimo, and I remember walking into those workshops feeling discouraged and exhausted and just felt like I was wanting to quit our homeschooling journey. And I remember leaving those workshops feeling very encouraged and inspired and rededicated to our commitment of homeschooling our children. And so I have had this group on my heart for a long time to want to bring encouragement to all of you homeschool families. And then God also laid Bonnie Landry on my heart to come and interview her, so I'm really excited to do this morning. So thank you so much, Bonnie, for having us here in your home and for taking the time.
You're welcome.
Yes, and so let's just jump right into it here.
Right.
So Bonnie, tell me a little bit about your family and about your children and what led you into your homeschooling journey with them.
Okay, so my oldest daughter is 31. I have 3 daughters and then 3 sons and then another daughter. And my 3 daughters are all married in the last 3 years. 3 daughters have gotten married, and our 5th grandbaby was just born on Sunday.
Oh, wow.
So things are moving along quite quickly for our family. My 3 sons are 2 of them are away at college, and so this year I only have 2 kids at home. So this is a first that I've had that many away all at once. The girls, of course, are all married and starting families, but the boys are away, and so I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old at home. Nobody's ever been to school, so we have just been doing our thing for the last 28 years, and that's been it's been an amazing journey. I've got not very many years to go. So the reason I started homeschooling is kind of a funny story. I was a single mom with my eldest daughter, and I met someone who just happened to, in passing, say that they wanted to teach their own kids. I had never heard of homeschooling. They wanted to teach their own kids so that they could travel. And I thought, oh, wow, that's a cool idea. I was not a Christian at the time. I just thought it was a very cool idea because I was so absolutely fascinated with this child. It was actually being pregnant with her, finding out I was pregnant with her, that brought me to God, because I suddenly had this revelation, all the scales fell away, that there must be something bigger than me in the world. Ooh, shocker. Because I didn't will this child into existence. And so here I was pregnant and thrilled to be pregnant and terrified to be pregnant because of the situation I was in. And yet I considered this to be the greatest gift that I could ever have been given. So I started at that point looking around for a giver. Eventually found the giver. And then, but prior to that, when she was just a baby, somebody mentioned in passing they were going to teach their own. I thought, oh man, that is the coolest thing ever. I would like to teach her. Right now, at this point in my life, I'm a single mom, and I could only imagine having her, because I'm just imagining that I'm going to be single for the rest of my life, because who wants a person with a daughter? And I was obviously very wrong about that assumption, but as she got a little older, I met my husband when she was 2. We got married. We started having more kids, and but this idea was still really on my mind, and I didn't know. I never even, still at this point, never heard of homeschooling, and I got into a conversation with another mother. And she said, what are you doing for school? And I said, well, I don't know. I'd really like to teach her myself. And she said, oh, well, I'm going to homeschool. And it was the first time I heard the word, first time I knew there was people out there doing it. Of course, we didn't have the internet, right? We didn't have anything to guide us. And I wasn't walking in Christian circles at the time either. So I didn't really even know at that point, homeschooling was very, very strongly, it was a 95% Christian movement. I wasn't aware that it was out there. I wasn't aware it was a possibility. So I was in Nanaimo. There was a few lovely families homeschooling in Nanaimo, and we got literally a handful, I think 6, and we got together and met them and realized that this was totally doable. So that's how I ended up homeschooling.
Wow,
yeah.
That is an amazing story. Beautiful
that was
story.
Very cool.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wow,
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And so what would you tell someone who is just starting out, who's just beginning or what could you tell yourself if you could go back now to the very
Right.
beginning of your journey? What would be some advice?
I think that the main things that I would focus on is not getting wound up about anything. You don't have to start thinking about high school when they're 5 or 7 or 9 even. You can start thinking about high school a year or two before high school. So don't reach so far into the future that you're going to get stressed out about that. I would say that it's really important to every single day of your life, however you do this, whether it's through prayer or whether it's through sort of self-examination, that you spend a few minutes thinking about what the goal is, right? The goal is to give your child a good education, but beyond that, the goal is the relationship with your child. You can't guide your child very effectively if your relationship is at odds. And so but most of us know that in our heart. We know that, and it's the reason why we homeschool. And we want homeschooling to look beautiful. We want it to look cozy. We want it to look loving. But when we get down into the day-to-day, a lot of days can go by where we don't feel like it's very loving. And so if we can remind ourselves, find ways to remind ourselves every day of our lives, is that we're looking to raise an adult who can live in the world and love other people, right? That's what we have to keep on our brains all the time. And so that will affect what actually happens on the day-to-day. So be farsighted, I guess, in the short form of that is be farsighted. Find ways and find resources that help you to be farsighted. And sometimes it means constantly reading and constantly, or watching videos or whatever it is that helps you to remember that farsightedness. But we can get very caught in our little rut and have a hard time getting out of it. And what ends up happening then is that we get in the rut and we think, I'm failing at this, I'm doing my kids a disservice, I'm not happy, they're not happy, and so we can give up, right? And so I think this is why it's so important to encourage others to be farsighted and remind them what this is really all about.
Right.
It's easy to forget.
Yes, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so 7 children at home. I need to know, how did you lead into a peaceful day? Like, could you just kind of maybe walk us through what one of your days would look like on average and how you...
Yeah, sure, yeah. One of, I think a couple things to bear in mind is I like life to be simple. I like to organize my life in a simple way. And I like my education to be simple. Because I think when we simplify our lives, we create more space in our brain to be available to the people we love. And I think that's very, very important. So for me, it wasn't about a schedule. I don't use a lot of curriculum. That doesn't mean I'm an unschooler. I would not categorize myself that way. There's certainly some areas I would lean that way. But I found that curriculum tended to cause stress. It doesn't, it's not supposed to cause stress, but it does cause stress because we feel like, okay, if they're not sort of online with things, what do we do? So how do I do that? That's I do a whole day workshop on that topic. How do I structure my day so that I can make joy accessible, so that I can work with my kids in this particular way that I do? So I would say I worked hard to develop a method of how we go about things. So what that method is for me is I get ready the night before. Okay, so I make sure, especially when my kids were small, less of an issue now. I have 2 older kids at home, and so for certainly less difficult to deploy my day. But when the kids were small, getting ready the night before, meaning whatever we're going to sit down and read together was going to be cleared off. Things were going to be ready. Breakfast was going to be out, so that I could go to bed at night knowing I was going to wake up to a reasonably tidy kitchen, not pristine, but pleasing was the word I like to use, right? Because we can get caught up in perfection as well, and that can be a detriment just as much as being, slothful can be a detriment. So that I would wake up and know that breakfast is out, we could pray together, we could, my kids would get their breakfast and we sit down and we read together, all right? I read to them while we're having breakfast, I have a cup of coffee, we have this nice cozy time where we read, and a lot of our history, sort of what we would call social studies, comes out of that time that we're reading together. We read a lot of historical fiction. I usually pick an era that we focus on. We read together, we discuss the book. Sometimes I might assign other reading to older kids, or I might read storybooks to younger kids of the same, kind of along the same topic. Right now we're studying sort of late middle ages, and so if my kids were small, I might pick a couple of storybooks that would be really interesting to read along with that, so they're actually getting more out of the novel. When the kids are done their breakfast, I always have activities and toys sort of around where we read, so that they can grab the Play-Doh, or they could grab the Lego, or my girls would crochet or draw. The boys would set up little Playmobil battles on the table while I was reading, right? Because having their hands busy meant I could read a lot longer.
Right.
So we read together. After breakfast, I do one-on-one work with them, whatever needs to be done. The younger they are, the more one-on-one it takes. As they get older, maybe there's only one or two subjects that are one-on-one, but they take more time. If I was helping somebody to write an essay, or helping somebody with, their math or whatever. But usually we were done the one-on-one work by lunchtime, right? So even in the maximum years when I was there's 19 years between my youngest and my oldest, so sometimes some weren't in school, weren't school age yet, and some were finished school.
Okay.
So the maximum I was homeschooling at any given time was 5. But you're still dealing with toddlers or adult children or whatever. Adult children take more energy than what you think. They're wonderful, but you have to be you're still really committed, especially when we've raised them the way we have. So we do our one-on-one work. I would used to work with the kids one at a time, just in age order. So I'd start with the youngest.
Okay.
I would spend 15, 20, 30 minutes, however long it took, one-on-one, and then to the next kid. And while I wasn't working with them, they would be doing what they could do on their own. So maybe they're doing music or their chore or whatever. They'd have a little checklist, and they were doing what they could do on their own. And then we would read together again at lunchtime. So it was an extension of what we were, what I'd done at breakfast. I'd read another chapter or two at lunchtime. So same process. Lunch would come out. We would pray together, we would sit down and read together, discuss, look up things, I have my resources set up in such a way. That might be actually something you want to take a couple pictures of, because the room is set up in there with maps and timelines and all of that, so that research and discussion is really fruitful while we're reading, right? So a lot of our curriculum per se is very literature based. And then we basically kind of have the afternoons free. So that's the time when I would plan to do my housework. I don't do housework when I'm working with the kids. I would just say, this morning is what I'm devoting to my kids. This afternoon is when we can go out and visit friends, or you can have people over, or we'll go outside, or I'll block off that time to get my housework done, get some dinner prep done, but not while I'm working with the kids. So I think that part of us has a desire to kind of multitask and do all the things at once, but I think in a way we're better off saying, okay, this is what I'm focusing on right now. When you know that you can do your other things later on, okay, then I have time to get my housework done, or have friends over, whatever. And just on that topic, I think we also have to do that with social media. I think it's really important that we set aside time to check our Facebook, to check our Pinterest, and we're not trying to do it in between what we're doing with our kids, because it's such a distraction, and really what we're teaching them is that distraction becomes more important than working with them, right? So I think that, but if we plan a time, then we can just relax. Okay, I'm going to have time to check my Pinterest, check my Facebook, do that stuff that I like doing this afternoon, because I'm going to spend my morning with the kids. Right? And it's also relationship building. So the kids are generally happy in the afternoon because you've poured yourself into them during the morning, right?
Yes.
Not that they're just suddenly going to go off on their own. The younger they are, of course, the more needy they are, as you know.
I was going to ask next, how would you balance then life as a homeschooling mom and time for yourself? Is there?
I think a lot of the structure of my day, because we have our afternoons free, I felt like I had the time, and because I've worked hard towards living a more simple life, I would say that I didn't feel the same kind of angst that some people homeschooling might feel, in the sense that I didn't feel like I was always chasing the day, right? Now that said, I think it's really still important to get time for ourselves to breathe, to think, to process, to remember that you, to remember the reasons why you've chosen this lifestyle, right? So I would say a few things. When I, certainly now, and I wasn't very good at this when my kids were small, because I was tired. I mean, most of the time I was insomniac a lot. So I was, spent a lot of time just, if the youngest were still sleeping, I would stay in bed, right? So I would just get up when they got up and sort of proceed with my day at that point, because I needed the sleep. But I would try to find some time in the afternoon just to reflect, just to have some time to myself. You know, moms joke about locking themselves in the bathroom, but in reality, we do need some time to gather ourselves. So for me, often it was when my husband got home from work, you know, and sometime before bed, I would just want to have a hot bath, and that was my breathing space, right? I know moms have handled that many different ways over the years. I've heard great ideas about, you know, I just need to get out for a walk. When my husband gets home for 10 minutes, I just need to clear my head so that I can not be grumpy for the evening. You know, I need to have a bath. I need to, you know, get out once a week with friends in the evening, or whatever. There's lots of different ways to handle that. For me, that, you know, few minutes in the evening was really important, just to have a bath and relax and clear my head. But also, for years and years and years, I took Saturday mornings off. And so what would happen is, basically, my husband and I came to this agreement that it was essential for me to have a planned time away, so that during the week, on Wednesday, if I was pulling my hair out and feeling stressed and feeling exhausted and all of that, that I could think, okay, you know what, it's okay, because on Saturday I'm going to get a few hours to myself. When my babies were small, I would just take them with me, because they're, you know, not much work when they're small, because you don't have to chase after them. So I would just take them with me. But, and you know, once they got to be toddlers, then I would leave them at home, and I could go out and do my you know, errands and whatnot. And sometimes I did just, you know, get my groceries or whatever without kids. But I always made sure I had an hour or so where I took myself out for coffee and I had some time by myself. And that was a lifesaver, having some planned time away. And I've often recommended moms to do that, because I think that we need to know that there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And so if we can really keep focused on that, and we're some of us aren't in a situation, maybe our husbands work away or they're not available, you know, at convenient times for us to get away. We have to find ways to do it, and maybe that's even trading with another mom. You know, I'll watch your kids for an afternoon once a week, if you watch mine for an afternoon once a week. So it's mutually beneficial, right? Or we hire an older homeschool child to come in for a couple of hours so we can get away. There's, you know, many ways we could do that, but I think it's really important that we work towards
having
that.
something to look forward to. That's awesome. So I want to ask, what would you do? I'm sure maybe out of your 7 children, you had maybe 1 or 2 who were a bit harder to homeschool or not as self-motivated. How would you deal with a child that's...
I would say that I didn't have issues with motivation as much, I think, again, because of our approach. So I would say my kids are pretty good at getting their work done. But in terms of getting along, I had a couple of kids who were much more difficult to get along with. And then I have one son who just had he's a really good kid. He's a good holy boy, but he struggled more with understanding things. And so that took a lot more time. So I would say those were challenges that I dealt with. My kids that I would say were harder to get along with, as in maybe they're moodier and more obstinate. It's a complicated question. So I would say if they were obstinate about work, I'm going to talk about older kids for a moment, okay? And then we'll go back to younger kids, because I think it's, you know, we do handle these things a little differently. With an older child, if they were being obstinate about getting their work done, I'm talking more towards high school years, my tendency would be to back off, right? You know what? But full disclosure, if you aren't going to do this thing that needs to be done, if you want to go to college one day, you're going to need that. You're going to need to get your English, and you're going to need to get your algebra. And even though you don't like it, and even though it's hard, it would be my goal to prepare you for the world. And if college is one door that you might want to consider, then this is something that we need to prepare. So full disclosure, if you opt out of doing that thing, I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to stand down there breathing down your neck. It's not worth it to me. It's not worth the angst in our relationship. So there's lots of different ways we can approach that. First of all, you can choose your own program. You could not do it at all. But I'm not going to write on a college transcript then that you've completed English. I can't in good conscience do that. So you need to know that that's not something I'm going to fake for you. But that said, if you decide you're not going to do English, here are your options. Okay? You could do it when you're 20. Right? You can go to college, you can get your GED. That's never happened, but it was discussion that did happen.
Yeah.
Right? But it's never happened that they actually opted out. They all got their work done, they all got their stuff done, but I was not going to breathe down their neck, and they knew that. Right? Again, kind of a whole big area of discussion about the way we approach discipline, the way we approach child rearing in terms of carrots and sticks. Like, if we start off with young children saying, if you do this, you're going to get this reward, or you're going to get this punishment. If that's how we operate, we are setting them up to expect that when they get older. Why should I do this? What's in it for me? Right? In terms of discipline, we are setting ourselves up for why should I do anything if I'm not being externally motivated, right?
Yeah.
So internal motivation, so that's a whole other sort of area of talks that I do, is sort of carrot and stick, how we can avoid that, how we approach things without external motivators, right? And sometimes it means taking the high road. So if I can back up now, so you're talking about little kids, if you're sitting and doing your math with a small child and they have a meltdown, meltdown can look two ways. They can get belligerent. It can look lots of ways, I suppose. But the two main ways that I see meltdown is they can get belligerent and miserable and frustrated. Okay? And so they lash out at you, they act out, right? Or they just melt into an emotional puddle. Okay? If we can't work with that. If they're in an emotional puddle, even if you're teaching them something that you believe they already know, or that you know they already know, and you're wanting to reiterate it with them, if they're in an emotional puddle on the floor, or if they're belligerent, it's not possible to teach somebody in that circumstances. If I was in a really bad mood, okay, or if I was an emotional wreck, somebody can't teach me something. They can't even teach me something that I already know, right? So if my husband came home and I was flying off the handle and really frustrated, and he said, you realize that tomorrow you're probably not going to feel this way and everything's not going to seem like such a big deal, right? I'm probably not going to react well to that. Also, if I come home and if he comes home and I'm weeping on the floor because I had such a terrible day, and he says, could you just pick yourself up, please? Tomorrow's going to be better, and you know that you're not going to feel this way tomorrow, so could you just get on with it, right? I'm not going to react well to that. How am I going to react well, right? And what we know is in relationship, and it doesn't really matter if it's a marriage relationship or a kid-to-child relationship or a business partnership, if the person comes alongside me and just is tender, right, that we are way more likely to be able to express our frustration and snap out of it a lot quicker, right? So when we think about a little kid, there's no point in trying to teach them something if they're in that place. Now, sometimes it's just situational. They're having a bad day, they had a fight with somebody, they haven't eaten, it's a moment. Sometimes it's chronic. And so I think that really what's important for us to be aware of is that we have a 6-year-old or 7-year-old and we're trying to teach them math, and they are in a puddle on the floor because they're not getting it. They're not getting it because they're frustrated. And however that acts out, in frustration or belligerence or in the puddle on the floor, if we scoop them up into our arms and give them a big snuggle and say, you're having a really hard day. And I think what's most important right now is that we fix this problem first, right? You know, I love you and I want to be here for you. And so, you know, maybe they can't tell you at that moment in time what the problem is. But the very fact that you just embrace them and love them and let them know that it's okay right now. You don't have to learn math right now. You're very, very frustrated. What's more important is we get to the bottom of that. And they might not be able to talk about it in the moment. But if you let the pressure off of having to get the math done, and you can just say, we can get back to that, right? I love you, and you're what matters, and we can figure out what's the problem with the math later on, right? Now maybe you feed them a sandwich and they do a complete turnaround and they come back to you and say, I'm ready to do my math now, right? Or maybe they say, I'm just not understanding it. You keep saying all these things about, you know, dividing and multiplying, and I don't really know what that means, right? And so then you know, okay, too much too fast. I need to back up, right? I need to back way up to what they do understand and what challenges them just a little bit and doesn't burden them, right? We have to really look, when we're working intimately with our kids, we have the opportunity to challenge them without burdening them. And it's something we have to be really sensitive to. And we know when we're burdening them because they'll, you know, react to that. We don't have to have a time frame about when they learn, you know, their vowel sounds. They're going to learn them, right? And if we can back off on the pressure, it's like, oh, they don't know, you know, they don't know all their vowels and their vowel sounds, and when it's a long sound and when it's a short sound. There's no time schedule in their brain. There might be in your book, there might be in your mind, there might be in the, you know, the BC curriculum, right? We don't know, but in their brain there isn't, right? Their brain is something, every person is so individual about that, right? So a real respect for the relationship has to be the overarching motivation behind everything that we do, right? So if we can remember that, and remind ourselves of that and practice it in little tiny situations. If we can see a kid starting to, that's the time to say, oh, this is hard. You know, let's have a snuggle for a minute. You know, and maybe you can go back to it, maybe you can't. But if you can sort of nip it in the bud, you know, that you can see that frustration is starting to build, let's do something else for a while. You know what I think? I think we should go out and play in the backyard for a while, right? We can come back to this later. And we think that people have said this many times, but they'll take advantage of us. You're teaching them to manipulate you, right? But that is actually not what happens. If your husband walks in the door and you've had a bad day, and he comes alongside you and just loves you and said, you know what, honey, let's just order Chinese food tonight. Let's go out for dinner. Let's just have a nice time and shrug this off. You don't think the next day, I'm going to start crying when he walks in the door so that we can go out for dinner. You don't think that way. You think, what an awesome husband. Yeah. He's so understanding. He loves me. Right. You're actually going to work harder the next day to make sure that, you know, you make a nice dinner, or you do something, you know, you appreciate him more, right? Yeah. You appreciate what he does for you more. And it's the same with our kids. They don't learn to manipulate through love. They learn to manipulate through carrots and sticks, right? And so it's something that is counterintuitive, right? I wonder sometimes, this is an idea I have explored many times in my own brain, but I wonder sometimes if the school system, which kind of has to work on carrots and sticks because you're dealing with a large group of people, and you have to motivate people en masse, right? So I could never do that. I have such an incredible respect for teachers who can, but you know, I can't imagine how hard that is. And so carrots and sticks are employed often in the school system, and the way we look at curriculum and the way we look at testing and quizzings and all the things that we do to kind of motivate people or to find out what they know, all of that can be taken out of the equation when we homeschool. And I wonder if the way we parent isn't in some way a back formation, right? Because I don't think that's been in place for very long. And the idea of carrots and sticks wasn't how things were handled when I was a kid even. Right? That's a kind of a new philosophy in parenting in the last few decades. And I wonder, in our effort to not be harsh with children, right? You know, to be spanking them when they do something wrong, or to be permissive, that's the word I'm thinking of, being permissive, we're looking at two ends of the spectrum. Well, how do I not be harsh and not be permissive? And carrot and stick is what we've come to. But it's actually not a satisfactory solution, right? And it can really, in a sense, ruin our lives, and ruin our relationships, because it reduces the relationship to contractual, right? As opposed to relational. That's not what our relationships are ever meant to be. It's not what our relationship with God is. And it's not how we operate as husband and wife. There are, marriage relationships that operate that way, but they're deeply disordered, right? It's deeply disordered to be, it's utilitarian, right? We don't think about our husbands and wives that way in a healthy relationship, right? And we shouldn't think about our kids that way either. But we run out of ideas. We run out of ideas to, well, what do I do if I don't threaten them? What do I do, right? So,
wow.
Yeah.
That is very.
It's a big idea, isn't it?
Is,
right?
Yes, I love it though. How you say.
Yeah.
I love the word tender. That you use the word tender. Just bring them tenderly and love on them.
Yeah, and tender doesn't mean permissive. You can say no.
Right.
We can't do this, and I still love you. And they might be flailing on. They don't have to like the no. They might be flailing on the ground. They might rail for days. But the fact is, you can just keep saying, I know you don't like this. This is a hard no for you. This is hard. But I have to maintain the no.
Yeah.
Maybe they want a phone, or maybe they, who knows, maybe they want, and I'm sorry, we just don't do that. Yes. You're 12 and you're not prepared to open up a world that that has some huge temptations in it,
Yes. Yeah.
And they will eventually come to understand that they can handle that no. Gordon, I'm a big fan of Gordon Neufeld's work. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Hold on to your kids. He says when they realize that they can handle no, little things, big things, and we have to practice. Saying no, I'm sorry, sweetheart. That's just can't happen, right? The main thing is we can't lose our cool, right? No matter how they flail about, we can't lose our cool. He says they build ego strength when we don't allow them all the little no's in the day. And it can even be like, I'm want X for lunch instead of Y. I don't want sandwiches. That's too bad. I'm just not going to make another lunch. So, this is what we're having. So, I realize that's hard for you to accept that, but that's you'll get over it. Yes. Right? You like this kind of sandwich, and it's and he says they build strength in themselves to handle life's disappointments because we say no. Yeah, right? And that's a beautiful thing. That's a really beautiful thing.
I guess we'll kind of maybe wrap it up here, but one of the questions, the last question is, what has kept you going for 28 years? What is the deeper driving force or motivation, I guess? Is that, for all these years?
That's a really good question. I would say the quest for joy has been the biggest motivator for me, and to be able to pass that on to my kids. I want my kids to have the best relationships they can, and I want to prepare them for the best relationships that they can be prepared for, with God, with a spouse, with their own children. And that's the thing that has kept me going. And so when we're going through a rough patch in relationship, that I can step back and say, okay, this is really, really hard, but I'm going to stick with it. I could put you in school, right? And that might solve the hours of day that you're away, but we still have the relationship problem, right? So if I can get over that hurdle with you, then I'm better preparing myself for heaven, but I'm better preparing you for your future, right? And it's been it's cool at this point in life to see the payoff kind of that, because we have 3 married daughters, and they've all chosen amazing spouses, right? Not perfect relationships, not perfect marriages, that's not possible, but they have chosen spouses that are such a sign for us of their deep commitment to being in relationships that are healthy and are going to be make them a better person, right? And that's an incredible thing to see as a mom later on, and you think, okay, because I did have days when I wondered, is it all worth it?
Yes, right?
Wow. Especially when your kids can go through tough times as teenagers and stuff like that, where they don't appreciate what they have, but what they are being raised with. But as adults, when they express the gratitude for for what you gave them. That's an amazing thing. And they sometimes express ingratitudes as well. That's a reality. Sometimes they think, I wish you had done this differently. And, you know, that's okay.
Right.
It's sometimes sobering to find out what they think might have been done differently, might have been done better. But that's good. Then they hopefully will take those things into their future relationships too.
Now, would you be able to share with us some of your resources that you do offer?
So, sort of my number one thing that I've done for years and years is this full day workshop, which I have done live for about 18 years. It was made into an online video product about 2 years ago, which has been fantastic because, you know, I can't be in all the places that I would like to be to share that message, right? Because the message is just not about how to homeschool. The message is about really, you know, healthy families and healthy relationships, and how does that look in the context of homeschooling. So that's been, it's just so incredible to be able to have that resource and pass it on to other people. I still do the live workshop, and I'm thrilled to do it when I can, and I usually do it 3 or 4 times a year. The video product has been a great resource. These little books, they're called the Homeschooling Simplified series. They're basically the transcript of the workshop, because what was happening over and over again is people would take the live workshop and then they would say, do you have something I can take home to remind me about what it is, you know, you said here, because I'm not going to remember all of this. There's so much material that I want to remember and can't. So the first one I wrote is on dictation, which I think is foundational to relationships and how we approach education in a really simple, wholesome, relationship-based way. If it's interesting, because I would always recommend people to read this book first if they wanted to choose one of the books to read. This is the one I would choose. But I've had many people say, actually, the one I think that people should read first is What Matters Most, which is about relationships. So it's not about subjects per se. It's about, you know, the overarching goals of homeschooling and family life in the first place. So that's what other people would say. So I also have one on chocolate chip math. So they're all going to be saying the same message, relationship first. But how does that look in language? How does that look in math? How to read a book so it becomes the curriculum is all about how to get the most out of your reading, so that you're not having to use a history program or geography program, that you are plumbing everything you read together for everything it has to offer, and that really becomes your curriculum then, right? And then this one is writing with children. So how does writing look in the context of relational homeschooling, right? So those are 5. I have that 5 is a little series. I have another one that goes with this that's a little bit different, called Great Books to Study Canadian History.
Okay.
And that book is primarily, the beginning of it would be the same as, where is it? This book, How to Read a Book So It Becomes the Curriculum. The first few chapters are essentially this book. And then it's a huge list chronologically of books recommended for studying Canadian history. Okay. Right? So it's a bigger book, and comes with a preview of about 200 books that you could choose from to study Canadian history with. And then this book I wrote about, I'm thinking 2 years ago. I'm Catholic, so I've got, you know, several different Catholic groups that I'm involved in and whatnot, and lots of parents that I've had the pleasure of working with. And they said, you know, you should really put what you have into words, into a book for Catholic parents. So I wrote this with Catholic parents in mind, and my goal is to write another book that goes with it on, this is very much ideology, right? Why we want to do what we do. Why we want to avoid carrots and sticks, why we want relationship first, what that really means. Book 2, that I have not gone around to writing yet, I have lots of notes, is the second part of that. How do we do that? What does it look like, right? Having said that it's written for Catholic parents, I have had tons of parents, secular parents, Protestant parents, buy it and really appreciate it, which is really neat. Like that, you know, I mean, I recommend sort of some Catholic resources. I recommend some Catholic practices. I think they are things that can also be used in secular and non-Catholic Christian avenues, right? So, for example, examination of conscience, right? When we take a few moments in the evening to examine our day, that's not meant to be a guilt trip. That's meant so that we can do better tomorrow. That's meant to take a look at your overarching goals of your life, right? And how we go about that. So, yeah, and I've, had feedback from non-Catholic parents and saying, yeah, it was great. I really appreciated it. And, so just, I always just make a caveat though, I talk about prayer in a Catholic context and whatnot. So, yeah, and hopefully I'll get the second one written sometime.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's called Revolution of Mercy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Bonnie.
You're so welcome.
For having us here in your home today and for sharing with us. You were very encouraging and inspiring. So
awesome.
thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Yeah. Thanks.